he stands in front of the sketches and he turns to me, and believe it or not, this is exactly what happened. I don't think I've ever told this story in public. He turns to me and he says, "I don't think you will ever be a successful designer."
Joao, welcome to Sharp Pencil Unthinkable podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. So, Joao is a car designer and he has designed some of the amazing, the most iconic vehicles that are there on this planet. So, he's designed the McLaren Elva, he's designed the W1, which was recently launched. He's also designed the McLaren Artura. And we all know one car which is very popular in India, which is Range Rover Velar. So he has designed these amazing vehicles, and we are going to learn from him that how exactly do you end up in a place like this, especially in design. So welcome again, Jao. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be invited by you guys. And thanks everyone to join in. I thought it was just you and me. So yeah, it's really, really exciting. Looking forward to it.
So I think you are the perfect person to ask this question. What is good design for you?
Oh, that's a very subjective uh, answer, because I think good design. My personal view on the good design is that design always has to have a meaning behind it, but that meaning might be very different from company to company. Because if you work in a company where design is, for example, every generation of new cars has to be different from the previous one, in comparison to if you work in a company where you build on the history of that brand DNA, you can see that these good design versus bad design is a completely different approach. Because if you are in a company where in every single generation of cars you have to have a different execution, you have to explore a lot more, and people might see it as mistakes. For example, brands who come with very revolutionary design DNA proposals, people will start with a sort of uh, hard to digest. So it's like, this is very different. I don't like it. So then the answer is going to be like, it's not very good design. But over time, people get used to that design language, and they will love it until they change it again. And this is in a very short period of time, right? Because we're just talking about companies who have to reinvent themselves very often, because they don't have this brand heritage of like bigger companies and older companies. And then when we talk about companies who build on this design DNA, good design really is building on that history and refining everything and improving proportions gradually on the cars. So I was actually really lucky in my career because I was exposed to all of this. So in Kia, the approach was like every new car, new design language. And then I moved to Land Rover, where every new car is built on the design DNA that we have, refining everything, making the products more modern, more attractive to new generations. And then McLaren was a different beast. But you can see that what's good design and bad design, it's dependent on the company, because at the end of the day, you are working for a company and you are building a car for a company, not for yourself. So you always have to have these sort of connect all these dots. But if I would have to make a sentence about what good design is, I would say that good design represents its brand, and it speaks to its values, and ultimately it attracts a lot of customers, because at the end of the day, a company has to make money.
Right. I think you spoke about reinvention and brands are getting into reinventing their design, and I can't stop but have to mention Jaguar. Jaguar is completely changing. How did you feel when you first looked at the entire rebranding that Jaguar did?
It wasn't shocking to me, because I think people need to remember that Jaguar is not making much money, and Jaguar has been struggling for a long time. I remember when I started at, so I worked in Land Rover, but I remember seeing what Jaguar was doing at the time, and I always thought that during that generation of cars, they were living in a shadow of the German brands. And Jaguar for me was always much more special than that. Jaguar was always this car that everyone loves from an aesthetic point of view. It's a car that doesn't follow rules. It's a car that is a lot more sensual, a lot more impactful. And what they were doing at the time, they were just like, they lost that identity. So they were just trying to copy other brands and other products that were successful. And you can see that when you do that as a brand, you're not going far, because you cannot beat other brands that are really good at that game, because that's their identity, right? So if you lose your identity and you try to copy other brands, and this goes to a personal level as well, by the way. So you have to keep your identity. You cannot lose it, because if you lose your identity, you're going to lose the customer base, because customers love that brand for a reason. So what they did recently, we can talk about the execution of the advert, and I think there was a lot written about that already, but I saw their approach as, right, this is the new brand. You might agree or not with the copy nothing sort of motto, but when I saw the advert without any car, I read it as, okay, they are defining the new pillars of this brand. So we don't actually need to see the car, because when you talk about design, you start with the brand, and the brand is pillars and the philosophy and the culture. You don't really have to define the product immediately, because then you can apply that philosophy to other products. So that's what they did. That shocked the world, because, Jaguar released an advert without a car in it. And when I saw the car, it didn't really shock me. I personally don't feel it's a very sort of a sexy, sensual shape. It is quite iconic, but I also feel that even though it's iconic, the question is, does it speak to the brand? And when we ask ourselves a question like that, is, are they breaking the rules completely for the brand as well? So this car that they did, is it going to completely ignore its heritage of the brand, or it's going to be building upon that and just create something new? So if you're asking me my personal opinion about if I like the car, as a standalone piece, I do like the execution of it. I don't feel it's a Jaguar. I actually feel, because I was in a brand when we reinvented Land Rover, and I saw what they were doing there, I actually feel that that car, it's a bit of both Land Rover and Jaguar, which personally I don't like, because they should be completely different products.
Right. That's
So yeah,
a different way to look at this, because most of the internet is just, against the entire, or they had a very similar opinion that what are they doing. But you have completely given a new perspective today. So I think that's very interesting. So you joined Land Rover in 2012. Land Rover is completely different segment. They make world-class SUVs. First thing, what is the ideology of Land Rover in terms of the design language?
it's about simplicity and focusing on volume and proportion, because that's the most iconic. So when we talk about volumes in car design, you see the car from a side view and you count the volume. So the bonnet is one volume, okay, and then you have the cabin, it's another volume, and then if you have like a boot, is another volume. So volume of Land Rover is long bonnet and the cabin. It's a really, really iconic silhouette. And then you talk about proportions. So it's the proportions between the elements. So you have the front of rank, proportion of bonnet to the cabin, rear of rank, which is longer. So Land Rover does not want to lose that iconic silhouette, and you can see that all of the silhouettes are really they have evolved over time. Then the second read, so that's the first read when you see volume and proportion. The second read is the surfaces. So their surfaces are super simple, right? It's like, I remember we used to spend years on just refining surface by a millimeter and like moving things up and down until it's like it's in a sweet spot. And then so first read volume and proportion, second read surface, and then the third read it's detail. And you see that when I talk about details, it's like the wheels, the headlights, what gives the expression of the front end, for example. It's like a bit of everything, but you have the lights. You want to give the car like an aggressive expression or a neutral expression. So in Land Rover, everything was like almost like laser cut. So you have like really smooth surfaces, simple sections, but then you see the execution of the details, and it's quite sharp. In essence, that's Land Rover as a design execution. Then you can talk about branding philosophy, but in the execution of design is that. And then the interior was the same. It's like super simple, like we call it like extruded surfaces. So it's surfaces that don't twist too much. They have a constant section, and you basically just extrude them along its dimension. Yeah, so it's a very, very different approach from many of the companies, because it's a luxury company. In a luxury company, you're not really supposed to have these dramatic changes in design and aesthetics, or even in branding, because you have, as I was saying before, you run the risk of losing your customer base.
Definitely. So to be specific, you designed one of the most best-selling models of a Land Rover, which is Velar. This was groundbreaking because visually it was adding more of a sporty look. In a way, Land Rover got rid of the boxy design and it was very sleek and very sporty. So take us through the whole development process of Velar.
It was the sort of the first production car that sort of represented these new mission for Land Rover to be more sort of not more accessible, but to attract more younger customers. And there was a big gap between the Evoque and the Range Rover Sport. I can't remember what was the price gap, but it was quite a big gap. So marketing realized that there was quite an amazing opportunity to slot a model right in the middle and make it look more attractive to a younger customer base. So it was a shift in the mindset of the brand, because we had already the example of Volvo, where Volvo used to be also like a brand who was seen as the old gentleman's car, safe, calm, not, it's like this sort of neutral brand. And Land Rover was actually going into that same space from a mindset point of view of the customers. So obviously the leadership of the company, they wanted to shape things around, and the Velar was the first of them. So Massimo Fratello was the design director. I actually worked on the Velar with an amazing designer, Pete Chovanek, from Slovakia, and and we were just working on it. So it was quite a long development. Again, that car under Massimo was very, very focused on the execution of the surfaces. The proportions always have to be like perfect. You can see that on the cars that came under his tenure. They all followed the same sort of philosophy. So it was a long process. It was amazing for me because I learned so much during that time, because coming from Kia to seeing these cars, which are quite big. So when you work in a car, I don't know if you've ever seen a clay model, but if you see a clay model, a full-size clay model, which measures 5 meters, and you have to put tapes on it, and you have to like read the section, you have to talk to the models, it's quite an overwhelming experience. So you have to force yourself to be exposed to that so that you learn, and then in the future you're more comfortable with that part of the process. So it was amazing for me because I learned so much about volume and proportion and how to design a car, not for yourself but for the brand. So as long as the vision is clear from the leadership, you might agree with it or not, but you have a vision to aim at. So it was really amazing to see that, and I still today I carry those values with me. So yeah, it was an amazing. It was the first one there. I did a lot of stuff there, but much of those didn't come because then the leadership also changed, and there was like some financial issues with the company a few years ago. But yeah, it was an amazing time there.
So how many years did it actually take to make the entire car?
Well, I can tell you, like the latest Range Rover, I actually worked on that as well as the very initial sketches and the very initial 3/4 or 40% scale model. I worked on that, and our first proposals was during my last year there, so it's been 9 years almost. That was for the Range Rover, for the big dad. Okay, so you can imagine, like in a luxury company, when things really have to go into the detail, it takes a long time to refine and finesse everything. The Velar was shorter, was maybe 4 years. But yeah, when we talk about luxury products, it takes a long time because you have to refine everything, and you need time. You cannot rush these things.
So companies like Range Rover, Land Rover, Ferrari, McLaren, they cater to luxury segment, a highly exclusive niche market. So when people invest huge sums of money to buy these kind of cars, it's about owning a status symbol. It's an experience that they are buying. It's an emotional connection as well. But what makes these people fall in love with these high-end vehicles? What do you think as a designer?
Uh, wow, very good question. I There's always a bit of show off. Okay, let's not embellish something which is very, very human. Like if you spend over 200 grand, or I mean, if you talk about supercars, it goes to the millions, right? But like 200 grand, 300 grand, there will always be a big portion of that is show off, because depending on the culture, you want to show other people that you are wealthy, right? And the way to do that, it's not just walking on the streets, it's acquiring these expensive products. So we're talking about status, as you said, show off. But then it also comes quality. And for many people, it's safety as well. So I know many people who buy SUVs because they believe they are safer. Also, the visibility of those cars, even though they are massive, they have an amazing visibility because first, you are higher in your driving position. And we have to remember that these cars are, for example, the Land Rover, they don't really have a limitation in production numbers, but because they are so expensive, they inherently are more rare than a normal SUV. So for a high net worth individual, that rarity is super important because they know that they own something that not everyone can. That's part of the status, right? We have the quality of the materials, and then it's an emotional connection to the brand itself. I mean, and sometimes you can't really describe what attracts you in a brand. You know, I think it's if the value of the company is if you can, for example, if the value of the company is a reflection of your own values, you will automatically have an emotional connection with that brand, because it's almost like Apple is a perfect example, right? Because Apple was always about challenging the status quo when they started. So that's why they had such a massive base of customers, because there were so many people that believed themselves that they were challenging the status quo. So they identify themselves with that value. And that's the secret of a good brand. If you create values where the customer base can also say, oh, that's my value as well, all of a sudden, the emotional connection is there. And that's why these luxury brands have such a strong sort of customer base, because their values are really clear.
So, based on your answer, can we say that to understand the real value of design, money and lifestyle plays a very important role?
Yes, yeah, I could say so. It depends. Again, it depends on a brand. If you have a brand which, for example, if you think about Volvo, right? You think about safety and almost like saving the planet, because they have these aura of like green, like a green brand and a safe brand. It's a completely different value from, for example, a Lamborghini. You're not going to buy a Lamborghini because you want to save the planet. Let's be honest. You buy a Lamborghini because you have loads of money and it's a toy that you want. You don't need. You want, and you want to expose it, and you want to play with it. So you see what I mean? It's like if the values are very clear, um, the question of the money or no money, you can be a company that wants to help people, or wants like to be more, for example, to be smarter in a way that you use sustainable products, and you expose, you are more transparent on your sort of manufacturing processes, to show people that you are more sustainable. But when it comes to luxury products is not a need, it's a want, and it's an emotional purchase.
So, designers working in the luxury segment must be discussing what works best when you create a product which is for the rich, like, or the a rich person might instantly buy something like that. So, whenever you develop a model, what makes you think that yes, this will be a storm in the luxury market? Is it based on your gut or is it very strategic?
Ultimately, it's how you know how to sell your idea. Many people, many young designers and many students, they don't realize that for you to be successful in your career, you have to be a really good salesman. And people have to realize this. Even if you work in a company that has 10,000 or more people, there's one sketch, one thing that came from your brain, and now you have to convince everyone that this is the thing. So imagine like how, like, the power of you as a designer to influence the future of an entire company. And the success or no success of that idea only comes from you.
Right. And I think for designers, this is very important because sometimes they get carried away with the design that they've made and they're very rigid about their design that this is the one, but they don't really know if it will fit in the market and they can't really convince that this is what is going to actually work. So I think this is what all the designers are going to learn today, that it's not just about the artistic capabilities that you have, but you have to learn about the market, the economy, what really people want. I think that
Yeah.
factor is very important. In 2016, you joined McLaren as a creative exterior designer, stepping into an entirely different realm. So, from Kia, then we went to Land Rover, and McLaren is a completely different car segment. So, one that crafts super luxury, high performance vehicles, both which are aspirational and exclusive. What was your first day like? What training do they give at McLaren? What was the first day?
Wow. Uh, well, the first day was interesting because I can actually tell you that the first day I actually stepped in the building was for my interview with Rob Miller. And that for me, I mean, the first day as a designer that was amazing, but the first day for an interview was a lot more impactful because I remember walking in the building, and so these days you can take photos of the boulevard where you have the historic cars, but at the time when I started there, you couldn't take any photos. And I remember going to the reception, and I saw all the cars from the Formula One historic cars, so from Senna, Mika Hakkinen, and I mean, I was a massive fan of Senna when I was younger, and even more when Hakkinen, because when I was growing up, Hakkinen versus Schumacher battle was the thing at the time, and McLaren for me was always the brand that sort of fought against Ferrari. So I always loved McLaren for some reason. Not like I did like Ferrari, but it was like this battle. And I remember I got into the boulevard, and I remember the lady telling me that I'll just sit there. They are going to call you for the interview. And by the way, you can't take any pictures. And I remember walking, and I saw the MP44 McLaren from Senna. And it was such an emotional time for me because there was almost like a 40-year-old guy. I think I don't know, maybe 30, no, not 40, I'm 32 maybe. And I see myself in front of a Formula One car, MP44, from Senna, who I used to watch as an 8-year-old or 9-year-old on TV. And I'm interviewing for McLaren coming from Portugal, which is like in the ass of a little country in the ass of Europe. So that was really emotional for me. And I was like, there's no way in this world that I'm not going to take a photo of this, because I didn't even know if I was going back there, right? So that was like really emotional. And and then the first day was as you can imagine, it was amazing. I mean, being able to tell people that I got a job at McLaren and having that on my CV, it's put it this way, it's nearly impossible to become a car designer because there's not many jobs. And as I was saying right at the start of this conversation, not many jobs. There's a lot of talented people. The competition is fierce. But so that's for a normal company. If then you think about those parameters and being like a designer in a supercar company, I mean, the chances are next to zero. So there was, designer at McLaren, and of course, I mean, for me, it was amazing. One of the best days, really, because I remember getting in there and seeing like the guys working, seeing the clay models. It was super special, and I was like literally thrown straight into designing, like bang, go for it. So the first car was actually the Artura, the first car I worked on with Paul House. That was the first one, so it was an amazing experience to start there.
Being a designer in McLaren must be incredibly exciting because you're not constrained by a price point. So the sky is the limit when it comes to designing these high performing machines. However, from a customer's perspective, or maybe an outsider's perspective would be a better way to put it, a real challenge seems having complete creative freedom. So when you're told go as wild as you can, it can actually be a very tough spot. So, how do you thrive in this situation? How do you really go about designing something?
Um, well, first of all, even though the price point of McLarens or any luxury product, the price can be quite high, there are always constraints in terms of budget, because the main reason for a business to exist is to make money. So if you design something which is really expensive to produce, you are biting on the margins of the business. So as a designer, even though you can be really creative, you have to have a sort of a business equipment or because you can't just tell people, oh, I'm just going to build this car that costs £1 million to produce and we're going to sell it for £1,050,000. So, there's always a balance. The good thing about McLaren, and I think in luxury products, it's because they are quite small companies. So if you produce something which is truly exceptional, the business sort of adjusts, right? Because it's quite nimble, the company. They can adjust the final price of the product to keep the margins. So if that's your original price tag and that's your sort of budget, but if the budget moves, it's quite easy for them to just move the final price. Because at the end of the day, they are really exclusive products and people will pay for this. If you work in a mainstream company which produces millions of cars where the margins are much smaller, you don't have that freedom because first it's a much bigger machine, the company. So you might be in a company where you have 10, 20, 30,000 people working. So they are a lot more sensitive to variations on budget. The briefing is usually more open, because if you work in a company, for example, like a McLaren or any supercar, the drama really has to be there because it's a theater. Right? Every time you approach that car, it's a theater. Every time you open the doors, it's another theater. Every time you hear the car, the engine is another theater. So it's all theater. So that's why when you approach that briefing, a briefing like that in a company of supercars, the aim is always like drama. And usually what comes with drama is price, because you have to have more. It can't be so simple. The product, if you go into like a really simple execution, it's hard to give it drama. So you need to realize that yes, you can go blue sky, but again, you need to adjust that design proposal, especially when you are in a more advanced conversations about budget, etc. Sometimes you need to adjust things. The question is, can we simplify and give it the same drama in a supercar, for example? If it's a luxury product, more simple like a Land Rover, it's different questions. But yeah, the designer is like you were saying before. The designer is way more than just a designer. If you want to be someone who just sketches cars, you might as well just be an illustrator. Okay, because design is not illustration. Design is building products, and building products for companies. So you're not designing, unless you have your own company, you can design your own car. But if you design for a company, you need to be realistic and humble enough to realize that this product I'm sketching is not for me, it's for a company. And the name of the company is a much bigger presence than your own name because it has a worldwide exposure, right?
Tell us a crazy story of McLaren, like maybe during making the car, or maybe even a client story, like a crazy client who came in to do some crazy modifications or customizations. Anything that to your mind.
Yeah, I mean, the W1 is a perfect example because when I sketched the W1, the car was actually it was more expensive to produce the car than what the company originally thought. So, but everyone loved the theme so much that they adjusted the budget to deliver the car. So that's a good example. So when you have something which basically the company believes in and thinks it's the new next big thing, the companies usually adjust for that to become reality.
So now let's talk about your brand. I think this is the point where we talk about entrepreneurial journey. So what is the story of Ennua?
So the story of Ennua was, as I was saying in the beginning of the conversation, I did so much in automotive that I to a personal level, it was not challenging me enough because I'm a very driven person, and I always aim to be better every day, every year, and that comes with challenges. So I need a challenge to feel that I'm improving. If I don't feel that challenge, I feel like I'm stagnating. So when I finished the W1, I sort of started wondering, what am I going to do after? Because it was that project took so much out of me from like delivery and passion that I actually believed there's no other car that is going to excite me. What am I going to do now? Right? Am I going to be designing an SUV? Like, where's the excitement on it? So I could have gone through the leadership roles, but that to me was at the time was still not very like exciting to me. Okay. And I'm someone who loves to be hands-on. So I decided one of my all-time dreams was always to build a brand of my own. And what I realized when I was at McLaren, I have this crazy story that when I was still studying in Portugal, product design, my sister asked me for help. Okay, and she was doing this professional course, which was like a fashion / design. And one of their the final project that she had for the year was to build a piece of furniture to a high fashion brand. So I think it was my sister and 4 others. It was their group. So they picked, the project was to do a sofa for Alexander McQueen. So that was the project. So they did a few sketches. My sister didn't like it, so she asked me to help. So we did this really cool sofa for. It was very conceptual, and then she showed the project to the head of the department, and they loved it. Anyway, years went on, and I started at McLaren, etc., etc. And at McLaren, I realized that composite materials, so like carbon fiber, they are really underused in many industries. So they are mainly used for like automotive because of their strength and the lightness. And during the time I was at McLaren, I was always like connecting these dots with the project I helped with my sister and carbon fiber. So when I finished W1 and I was trying to understand what I wanted to do for my next step in my career, I realized, fucking hell, I connected the dots. Carbon fiber, sculpture, like whatever form you want, because carbon fiber gives you that freedom. And I realized the market is lacking a luxury product as a lifestyle product, not as a car, but it can be like the furniture, it can be whatever, headphones, but it's lacking this sort of approach where you have a really artistic product, but it's still functional. And the artistic side of things is triggered by the composites, because you can create crazy shapes with composites. You can basically build anything you want with composites as long as you have the money. So Ennua was really this vision of turning ordinary object, which is, for example, it's a seat. Let's just call it a seat, a chair. When you see a chair, you know automatically it's a chair. So what I wanted to do with Ennua was like, when you see a product, you don't really understand what it is first. So you're like, is that a sculpture? Is that like, and then so it compels you to approach it. And when you approach it and you get close to it and say, oh, I can sit on this thing. So it has this sort of sculpture versus function. It plays with this sort of sort of puzzling aesthetics.
I visited the website and I saw your products. That was the same reaction that I had, that what exactly is it? But I really want to have it. That was the first reaction when I saw it. So
Yeah.
beautiful products. Now, I think we've spoken about your experience, we've spoken about your new venture as well, your journey into entrepreneurship. This is the best point to ask you something about design education. Looking back, what are some gaps that you've observed in the design education that is taught today? In your opinion, what aspects should be emphasized more to produce better and more industry ready designers today?
Mm. I'm quite biased on that because my automotive design education was in Forsheim, and we were lucky in Forsheim because we had a lot of people from the industry coming. And these designers who used to come, so we used to have designers from Mercedes, Volkswagen, Mazda Europe, and a few others. So so they were tutors, and they would come like once a week to tell us about our work, tell us about what's important in this industry or not. So we had direct access to what the industry wants. But I'll give you a perfect example. When I was studying in Forsheim, even maybe like 5 to 10 years before that, all of the student projects, and we used to have these really cool design. It was like a worldwide design competition between famous design studios. So you had like Volkswagen, Citroën, Mercedes. So all of these big companies used to participate in this design competition. And I'll never forget that the vision of an electric car at the time was a single seater, super small vehicle, right? That occupies very small space. And you basically can park it anywhere, and you can rent it, and no one is going to ever own like a car. So the ownership is all out of the water because no one will want to own a car anymore. And then you travel 20 years on, and you see electric cars, and what do we have? Massive cars, super heavy. Okay. So, and you can see it's not just because of the technology, but it's also because the market is completely different. A person that cares about a car does not buy cars because they are functional. We have to be emotional about it. So if you think logically, yes, logically, it's more than obvious that we should shrink the footprint because you're going to use less materials, you're going to use less fuel because the car is also lighter. But the reality of the market is that people, to buy small cars means that in your brain is that small, it's not safe. Because if a car like that gets hit by a Range Rover, that bloody thing is going to roll endlessly, right? So, and this is the thing, like universities, they don't have this critical thinking about what's the real world issues. Okay, we have a real world issue of like sustainability and pollution, etc. But what's the real world issues in your brain as well? We have to talk about human psychology. So safety, and then you talked also like status, presence. So a super wealthy person is not going to be buying a little car, okay? Because that gives no status. It's the reality. It's human nature, right? It's been on like this since ever. Really. So I think universities have to come a bit more down to earth sometimes. And the best thing to do that is to bring professionals from the industry to the university to speak to the students, because the professionals are the ones who are defining problems, finding solutions for problems that exist today. So there's a really good balance between the conceptual sort of view of universities in 50 years time, but then they have the reality of actual designers working on today's issues.
Definitely. And this is a beautiful example of that. You being here today and few students getting to listen to you and your experiences. It's a beautiful, it's like this is happening. What you just mentioned, it's happening here, right here. Countless Indian aspirants who want to be a designer like you, they're probably sketching in their notebooks the designs that you've made. What is one advice that you have for such students, very young students?
Hmm. Oh, so many advices. The first advice goes to a personal level is never lose your identity. Okay. So if you are a big dreamer, keep being a big dreamer. Second is no matter how talented you are, don't get into the cocky mindset thinking that because I'm talented, I don't have to put into put in the hard work. Because talent without hard work is not going to take you anywhere. So, for example, when I was studying in Pforzheim in Germany, because I was mixing with a lot of German students, and because they live there and they inherently have more connection with the industry. Okay, I can give you actually a few good examples of my career that show that you really have to put into the hard work. So when I was in Pforzheim, I could see that all of these German students, they had contacts with previous students that were working in companies, and basically those contacts cascade into their own network. And me and others being foreigners, I was from Portugal, there was a guy from Mexico, a guy from Russia, Canada, so we didn't have access to those contacts. So the only way for you to show that you are worthy is through your hard work and the quality of your work. So when I was in Pforzheim, we used to have these reviews weekly with the head of the department. And this is just to show you how to be part of the industry, you have to have a very resilient mindset. And we used to have these reviews, and in one of the reviews, so we used to sketch almost like a 3-meter by 2-meter board full of sketches every week. And I remember I was with the head of the department, and he stands in front of the sketches, and he turns to me, and believe it or not, this is exactly what happened. I don't think I've ever told this story in public. He turns to me and he says, "I don't think you will ever be a successful designer." And I was like, okay, and he said, because your work is not there yet. You need to put, a lot more effort into this, because I could pick anyone in this class and they will be better than you. And of course, I was a 20-odd-year-old man, and this conversation could have gone two ways. Okay, it could have gone, my work is shit, I'm quitting, I will never be able to get to the top. Or, I know what this guy is doing, he's filtering the good ones from the bad ones, and I'm going to prove this guy that he's completely wrong. Okay, so you see the mindset. Like, you are a quitter, or you are a monster, a winner. So I chose the second one. So I was like, right. And this goes back to my first point of never lose your identity, because I was like, right, no one will ever tell me that I cannot achieve anything. So if I put in the work, no matter how talented I am, I'm going to put the hard work to prove everyone, but most important, to prove to myself that I can do this. So never lose that. Hard work and be yourself. And then when you are already working for a company, or even like if you work in a university, even though you can be a very, very sort of a motivated person, or very driven, never ever lose these humble side of trying to learn, because there will always be someone who is better than you at something. And don't detach yourself from that, because it's much easier, even though they can be much better and you might see them as a competition. Always be humble enough to learn from that, because through so many years and through so many people I've met in the industry, I saw people who were much better sketchers than I was, much better speakers than I was, much better negotiators than I was, but always have a mindset to learn from those people. You don't have to speak with them, you just observe. Learn how to observe and to get the positive things for you and just ignore the negatives, like the naysayers or whatever. Because that's it's an exponential learning curve. Okay, you start really slowly, but as soon as your skills, and it can be any skill, right? Speaking, designing, rendering, all of it. As soon as your skills start picking up, it's an exponential curve. So initially you might feel frustrated, especially as a student. But once you are exposed to these events and people, and you are humble enough to learn from them, it's a beautiful journey. And then you get to the point, okay, and this might sound cocky, but if you have this approach, you get to the point in your career when you enter in a room and people respect you for the knowledge that you have. So, and that's what you want. You want to get in when you are like, I don't know, like 40 or whatever, 50, and you get in a room and people respect you because you are respectful to them and you know what you're talking about.
You have inspired the entire generation of Indian designers today. And when this is going to go out, it's going to make a blast, definitely. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Well, it was a pleasure and an honor. So thank you.